I'm going to talk through now a lesson plan. The lesson plan comes from the Level 2 Youth Work certificate that I delivered last year as an apprenticeship course for Kensington and Chelsea College in partnership with Kensington and Chelsea Youth Development Service and the London Apprenticeship Company, the employer. This is session 5 from a programme, I think, of about 20 sessions, some of which I'll include in the portfolio. The course was completed earlier this year. 2 or 3 of these apprentices, well 4 actually, have gone on to the advanced apprenticeship. Anyhow, the session plan is attached within the portfolio, but I'll just go through it to explain how I operate. Initially, as I've said previously, I have an arrival activity to engage learners, and on this occasion I had invited, or one apprentice had taken up the offer to deliver that session himself, in fact in this case, and he delivered an activity which was a human rope activity, so it involved entangling and disentangling a rope, something I've seen very often, but it was the first time this learner had run this activity, so that was substantial learning for him and others. I then introduced the programme of the day, explaining what we're trying to cover and what I'm hoping to achieve in covering that in terms of learning. Then we went on to an activity which was really about coaching young people through situations. So I was asking learners to work in small groups and to consider an issue-based situation with a young person and ask themselves a series of questions in relation to how they would analyse the activity, analyse what was going on for the young person, and how they might respond, what they might see as their limitations, and where they might refer a young person if the issue was beyond their capacity, the worker's capacity to deal with in its entirety. So there was a small group learning situation, and following those small group discussions, individual learners were then given a note sheet with specific questions on it that they could complete to record their learning, essentially. And those note sheets I always include in a box at the end of the sheet reference to the assessment criteria to which the learning relates in terms of the overall qualification, so that when it comes to referencing the material, it's more straightforward for learners to identify what this particular activity relates to. Following that activity, I then introduced a very kind of interactive activity. Again, not an uncommon activity, but one which, in my opinion, fits the purpose very well. This is the tower building activity, in which you divide learners into 2 or 3 groups, depending on the numbers you have, with 4 or 5 learners in each group, and with materials they're asked to build a freestanding tower. And there are rules to this activity in terms of the time they have for discussion, the time they have to purchase materials, and then the time for building the tower. Materials are not free, they have to be purchased, and there's a scoring system that takes account of the time that it's taken to build the tower, the height of the tower, and the materials bought. It's, in my experience, a very successful activity. Groups get into this in quite a deep way, quite competitively, and I would say that there's a lot of fun and enjoyment had from it. at the end of the activity we have a break, and then I explain how this activity relates to the whole activity cycle that we follow, consciously or not, when we're designing youth work activity for young people. And my aim is to demonstrate that the more consciously they're aware of the cycle of the whole cycle, that the more effective they can be as youth workers. I've adopted an activity cycle called APPLE. This was borrowed from Young at London with their permission some years ago. And APPLE is an acronym which stands for Assess, Plan, Prepare, Lead, Evaluate. It works as a core activity process, or a core means of understanding the whole activity process, and it can be adapted to the different different activity planning, reporting, evaluation cycles that most services employ. So it easily relates to anything that they may be using. And essentially I go through the TOWERS activity using the APPLE cycle to enable them to identify within the TOWER activity step by step which of the steps they undertook relates to which part of the APPLE cycle. I believe that experiential learning enables most learners to take the understanding in. I believe it helps most learners then to move forward and more easily understand a full youth work activity cycle. At the very end of the session, having done something very interactive and then something that was led by me as the trainer, some input on APPLE. Again, they have an APPLE template sheet which they complete, and on that they describe step by step the APPLE activities and how the APPLE activity and how it relates to the tower building activity and how it relates to the APPLE cycle. And then finally with this session, I wanted learners to think about, to introduce themselves in terms of their portfolio, talk about themselves, their unit, the activities they deliver, and any youth work skills that they identify that they have, bearing in mind this is near the beginning of the Level 2 apprenticeship course. But in this case I asked them to do that in pairs and threes, and to use the flip cameras exactly as I'm doing now. In this way I'm ensuring that within the training sessions they're gathering evidence for their portfolios, and that they're gathering evidence in a variety of ways. So whereas it had been notes from the Cards for Life and the APPLE template, where they made notes for themselves, here it's video interview, it's a different kind of technology, and in terms of building a portfolio, bringing their own evidence from the workplace, etc., it gives them a variety of methods that they can use to actually present evidence.